Hi, we're at the Mobile Web Africa conference and I'm chatting to Marc Smith. Marc, I asked how to introduce you and I thought, let me ask you to introduce yourself because there's a lot going on in your life. You're probably not getting a lot of sleep at the moment. So
No.
Can you give us a very short bio of who and what you are? Because you've got some pretty interesting stuff on the go, haven't you?
Well, thank you. Hi, I'm Marc Smith. I am a sociologist. I work in two organizations. I am Chief Social Scientist for ConnectedAction.net. We're a consulting firm. And I also work as the director for the Social Media Research Foundation. We're SMR Foundation.org. And our goal at SMR Foundation is, we have a motto: open tools, open data, open scholarship. And in particular, the tool that we are building and give away for free, it's free as in speech, free as in beer, is something we call Node XL, the Network Overview, Discovery, and Exploration add-in for Excel, the familiar spreadsheet tool on Windows. So if you have Excel 07 or 10, you can download from our site a free plugin. And this plugin turns Excel into a social network diagramming tool. And that has particular value in a social media context because it has been tuned to collect networks from social media networks, things like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and Flickr, email and the web are all made of connections. And our organization is very interested in helping people get value from collections of connections. And I would argue that that's the data structure of our era, that in the 20th century it was all about time series, how much and how did that change over time. This is the 21st century. We have a lot more CPU, we have more bandwidth, and we have a lot more data. And that data now typically takes the form of a network, a graph, a connected structure. So we build and give away a tool. Our aspiration, when we grow up, if we got to be what we want to be like Firefox, but Firefox is for HTML. We are a browser for GraphML. GraphML is a little known but very important file format in XML that represents a network. It's a file format that contains a graph. So we consume GraphML, we emit GraphML, and we provide people with the tools to analyze these connected structures. That could be who follows who in Twitter, who are all talking about a topic. It could be the people who are connected to you in Facebook and how they clump together into subgroups. Many businesses are now really trying to engage social media, and my sense is that they lack the right tools. We like to say that Node XL is a web browser. Now I admit that that word is taken. Firefox, Safari, all those guys, they're web browsers. A little word in for IE and Chrome. But web browsers as we know them actually do not browse webs, they browse pages. Node XL is a web browser in the sense that it shows you patterns of connections between people and things. And in these structures are insights. We think very important insights for business in figuring out who are, of the many people who perhaps mentioned your brand, your product, your service, your event, who among them are really the most influential.
Can you give us a bit more insight into your ideas of influence? Because not all influence is equal.
That's right, yeah. Wait, the marketplace has embraced this word influencer. And I have a few issues with that word, at the very least because it seems like it suggests there is one and only one kind of influence. We propose that there is actually a different way of thinking about influence, and this is the idea of strategic location. There are many places on the landscape that if you control that spot, you control maybe the trade route, maybe it's the mountain pass, it's the place where the river comes to the ocean. These are strategic locations in the geographic world. There are also strategic locations in the social network world. There are people, and I think most people think when they think of influencer, of the person who is very well connected. And it's true that that's one kind of influence, the person who has the most followers, the most friends. But it is possible to have many connections and have less value in the aggregate of those connections than someone with far fewer connections. It turns out that having the right connections can be more important than having many connections. Size does not necessarily matter. It is, in fact, the quality of connections that matter. And you can see this, and maybe in the associated materials with this video, you'll see some pictures. And in these pictures, we'll highlight people who are what we call hubs, and hubs are more traditionally, the influencer. They've got lots of connections. But the other role or position that we think is very important is the bridge. And the bridge may, in fact, have only 2 connections, and yet those 2 connections may be much more important than 100 connections, because they are the only connections, let's say, between Group A and B. And if you want to get your message from Group A to Group B, you are going to need to use a bridge. And so the bridge need not have that many connections for those connections to be more valuable, more strategic, for them to occupy a position in the network that is more important than somebody who just has a lot of connections, especially if those many connections do not span from one cluster to another. So we are trying to refine the notion of influence to be broader than I think that the vision marketers often have is, wouldn't it be nice if all of the humans in your marketplace would line themselves up like dominoes in a row, such that you could flip one domino over and they would tell a friend who would tell a friend and tell a friend. Maybe it would fan out. But our research shows that, first of all, it's typically not just one domino, it's dozens or hundreds. The cascades don't go that deep, they are relatively shallow, but the intuition that if I can only find the right one person, there's something valid about that intuition. But we want to refine that concept to include people who don't just have lots of connections, but have strategically important connections.
Okay, and in terms of social, you made some really interesting points yesterday about what social isn't.
Right.
Because it's very easy to think just because we're online, we're actually social.
Right.
Would you expand on your thoughts there? Because there were some really good points you made there. It was fascinating.
We're at Mobile Web Africa here, 2011, and there were some really great presentations about how marketers have used technology to engage their audiences with their brand. And the argument was that these were all social media. And I took some exception to that. In particular, there was a service that Nike ran that allowed you to interact with content about their shoes and about athletes who use their shoes. And my argument was that's not social media, that's digital media. And digital media is fine. But what's the difference between digital media and social media? Well, I would argue all social media is digital media, but not all digital media is social media. And the difference is social media connects you to other people. It's not one-to-many. It's not you listening or consuming a brochure. It's you connecting with people you know, people you are going to know. But it's about human relationships. It's not about the consumption of brand messages. Now, admittedly, social media is being used in the context of brand marketing, and that's fine. Brands are an important part of people's lives, and people are happy to talk to each other about the brands that matter to them. And when they do, that is social media. But if you cannot connect a person to another person, that is not social media. And whenever you do connect a person to a person, and I've argued that despite the differences between all the different kinds of social media, wikis are not blogs, blogs are not YouTube, YouTube is not Facebook, the one thing they have in common, their common denominator, is that they all author networks. I follow you, I friend you, I forward a message to you, I reply, I rate, I review. I call these the internet verbs. There are about 10 or 11 of these internet verbs: rate, review, reply, forward, follow, friend, comment, link, mention. There are others. And every time you do one of these verbs, you are authoring a link, a tie, a connection between you and that other object, and that object may be a person.
Yes.
And if it's not a person, it was authored by a person, and therefore you have an indirect connection to that person.
Fantastic.
So we are, in the Social Media Research Foundation, trying to create tools that broaden people's awareness. We all know that this is the era of networks.
Yeah.
But my challenge is, where do you get a network? How do you analyze it? What do you store it in? How do you draw a picture of it? How do you get an insight from it? How do you share that insight with others? We argue that we are building a tool, that tool again, NodeXL, NodeXL. NodeXL is that tool. It gets you a graph from Twitter, from Flickr, from YouTube, from Facebook, analyzes it for you, draws you a picture, and while it still takes some skill to master, we believe that if you can make a pie chart, you can now make a network chart using NodeXL, and no matter what your brand, what your product, what your business, if there is no one talking about you in social media, you have a bigger problem than not being able to master network tools. Chances are there are people talking about you in social media, and that they're not all equal in their importance to your brand. In the presentation yesterday, I showed many images, and maybe you'll link to them.
Yes.
And in those images, you could see that some people are very much the hub or the bridge, and other people are isolates. Isolates are people who mentioned a topic, but are not connected to anybody else who also mentions that topic.
Okay.
And the point I made was that for different purposes, the hub or the bridge could be more important. But in other circumstances, for example, new customer acquisition, isolates are more important. And so it is not the case that we think only the most connected or even the bridge people are the most valuable people for you. But if somebody says the name of your brand but has not yet made a connection to anybody else talking about your brand, well, you have a real opportunity.
Yes.
There are 7 billion people on this planet. Most of them have never heard of your brand. Here is somebody who's actually stood up and in a discoverable way mentioned you.
Okay.
Wow, that's really telling you that you should reach out and connect with that person. And other research, I'm thinking about the work of Robert Kraut from Carnegie Mellon, who showed pretty definitively that if people enter a social media space and they are not greeted, they will leave. And so marketers should pay attention to both extremes. The highly connected brand champions, they're talking about you, they're well connected, they're bridges, they're hubs. That's great. But if you're looking for new customers, well, these are already existing customers. New customers are people who are very lightly connected. And if you want to keep their engagement with your brand, either you, your brand account, or others who are working with you should connect to them. They should follow them, friend them, they should engage them, they should say, hey, I noticed that you talked about brand. I talk about brand too. You know, maybe I could share something with you. Engagement is what keeps people in the fold, and when people come and come back to talk about your product, your brand, your service, they are giving you access to themselves in one of the lowest cost media available for engaging them.
Okay, fantastic. And just a final question, Mark. Your thoughts about going forward over the next year. What do you see the big shifts in terms of social media? It's open question, probably a bit misleading question, but
word, we're here at Mobile Web Africa. I will certainly say mobile.
Short and sweet and simple there.
Mobile and location is going to become a much more dominant part of all of our interactions. There are several buzzwords. There's NFC, near field communication. I believe that some form of, there is a technical innovation that's coming. And my argument is that is when my phone notices your phone.
Yes, okay.
Think about it. Your phone notices all sorts of things. It knows where the cell tower is. It knows where the Wi-Fi radio is. It doesn't seem to notice that I'm standing near you and you have a phone. No doubt, I have a phone. No doubt, we all have phones. And yet we walk in and out of rooms and we don't even have any information about the people we were just standing near. That, I believe, is going to change. And when that does, it means that we're going to move from even more than we already have, from an ephemeral society where we have a conversation and it just disappears into the air, to an archival society where every time I walk past you on a sidewalk, every time we stand together in the coffee bar, this is going to be recorded, and it will become available for you later to find out, oh, we had that conversation, but oddly I can no longer remember your name, sadly, and so I can look in my phone and it'll tell me where I was, when I was there, and who was with me. Okay. I think that is a pretty dramatic change in the nature of how we go about being social. And as a sociologist, I have to say, the social quality of humans is what sets us apart. We are very good at being social. We haven't really changed the way we are social for millennia. I mean, since speech, since body adornment, since jewelry, since ritual scarification, all these things that we did to ourselves to communicate who are we and where do we stand within our societies and hierarchies, that hasn't really changed in 1.5 million years. It's about to change.
So things are about to get exciting.
Yeah, I would say we are still in the Model T Ford phase of computing.
Okay.
It is still the time where, you know, you can get in the car and it drives, but it has no cup holder, it has no rear window defogger, it doesn't have windshield wipers, it doesn't have safety belts.
Yes.
And the safety belt part is an important point because for as exciting as all these technologies are, there will be social consequences, not all of which will be positive. And I'll note that it often takes decades for law and social mores to catch up with, or for that matter even technology to catch up with, the initial benefits and costs. A historical example is, here we are in a hotel and all over the ceilings of this building are fire alarms and fire suppression technologies. There are water spigots all over the ceilings. When we started building buildings that were big enough to have hundreds of people in them, we did not make the technologies to make sure that they didn't burn to death a standard feature. When we created automobiles, we did not put safety belts into them for decades. And so I do think that we have a challenging couple of years ahead of us, and maybe because technology moves so much faster now, it won't be 5 decades from automobile to seatbelt to airbag. It won't be 5 decades from multi-story building to fire alarm, fire suppression, and fire escape. But we should always be aware that all technologies have costs. And to the extent that they have benefits, we cannot resist them. And as a result, we have to pay the cost until we can figure out how to mitigate that. So that's the big change. We're about to electrify the place where we interact with each other. Right now, we've been sort of off on the desktop, in the laptop, on the phone, talking to people far away. I think the big new change is going to be interacting with people right near you, getting information about the people and the places near you, in your phone and in your cloud.
Fantastic.
And that's going to happen very soon, I think.
Marc Smith, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating.
Well, thank you.
I could stand here all day talking to you.
But your arms are going to get tired.
Yes, they will.
That's right. Well, thanks for the interest.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Cheerio there.
Bye now.